Well, hello and welcome to the Movie Paradise. I'm your host, Nathanael Molnár, and this is Movie Night Tonight. How this works is every week we watch a movie and discuss the film in depth. We are currently in September, and September's theme is music movies, and the film tonight is Whiplash. I am joined by a great panel today to discuss the movie with me. First up, we have Connor Murphy.
Hello.
We have Crystal Gonzalez.
Hello.
And Nick Polidor.
Hi.
So, last night we watched Whiplash, and I think it's safe to say we all pretty much agree that it's a really good movie, but I do want to go around in a circle and just say what your basic initial thoughts are on the film, and how many times you have watched it, because I think it's important to keep in mind how many times we've watched the movie, so we know how much exposure we have to it. So starting with Connor.
This was the first time I've seen this movie. I had heard a lot of things about it. I had a friend that is really into drumming. Like he went with a drum corps around like a big tour of New England, and he basically said that this was like one of the best movies he's ever seen, and I was like, oh, I better see it then. And I just hadn't got around to it until now. And it definitely lived up to my expectations. Although I kind of expected it to be more of like a niche movie for drummers, and it wasn't like that at all. So I'm glad that my expectations were wrong there.
Yeah. Crystal?
I've seen this movie about 2 times now. It never ceases to amaze me. I can find so many more things that I like about it every time that I watch it.
This is probably the 4th or 5th time I've seen this movie. I own it on DVD, and I have the soundtrack on vinyl, so I would listen to that a lot. I love this movie so much. Although this time, I haven't seen it in probably 2 years, so watching it this time around, I definitely had a different perspective on it. Like I really was able to open it up and dissect it and really get in there. And I thought some things I never thought about the movie before.
Yeah. And this is probably my 3rd or 4th time seeing the movie. And like you were saying, Nick, when I watched it this time, there are definitely things about it that I hadn't thought of before. And one of the things that I particularly picked up on was the editing. Mm-hmm. And just how razor sharp the editing is. Now, Whiplash did win Best Editing at the Oscars for the 2015 Oscars. And it's a well-deserved win because the pacing of the editing and just how they cut right on the music, right on the beat. It does have a very, even though Baby Driver came after, it has sort of a Baby Driver feel to it in terms of the editing. And the editing is just so razor sharp, and it gives so much energy to the film. Mm-hmm. That was one thing that I really picked up on this time around. So we had a bit of a discussion after we saw the movie.
Yeah.
And I kind of want to tap back into that for this and just talk about what are some of the... Because I think this is a very loaded film. There's a lot of layers to it. There's a lot of meaning to it. And it's not just a movie about a guy who drums.
Yeah.
There's so much to it, and it's so packed with rich character development and excellent editing and performances. J.K. Simmons, just astounding performance. Easily best performance he's ever given.
He won the Oscar for that.
Yeah, he won his Oscar for it, and very well-earned and well-deserved win, in my opinion. But I thought we discussed a bunch of things, including this idea of the tragedy of Terence Fletcher. And Terence Fletcher is the character that J.K. Simmons played in the film. And I think it's definitely worth noting how the movie is this tragedy for this character. Mm-hmm. And even though he's not the central character to the film, I think his arc is probably one of the most important. And while you also have Andrew's character arc, and they kind of do cross each other, this whole underlining tragedy of Terence Fletcher, I think, is very important. And you have a person who believes so much in trying to get the new Charlie Parker.
Yeah.
He wants the new Charlie Parker, and he wants to bring about greatness to a dying industry of jazz. and he has dedicated his life not to playing himself, but to trying to find the next person, and to pretty much bully the person into becoming a great. And there's really a tragic element to it. It's kind of like a Shakespearean tragedy, just with this one character arc. And I thought that to be one of the most striking parts of the movie, and something I really took away from it.
Yeah, definitely. I didn't initially see the whole character of Terence as a tragedy, but when you bring it up, I really thought about it more, and I really did think that there's a tragedy surrounding him, and there's like this underlying tragedy throughout the whole movie. What's our spoiler policy?
Oh, full spoilers.
Oh,
Just
okay.
full
Okay, yeah.
I should have prefaced this for the listeners that this is a full spoiler. We're going in depth, talking every aspect of the film.
Throughout the different competitions in this movie, or the times that jazz is being played for an audience, be it at the first competition they're a part of, or when Terence is fired and he's in the bar trying to make ends meet, I guess, or, doing that, they're playing for half-full rooms. They're playing for, the first competition, when so much is on the line, for Terence, he's playing to like 15 people in an empty auditorium. So the whole underlying theme right there is something I picked up on and I found very interesting.
And I love bouncing off of that. I love he's just playing the piano, and you can tell he's putting everything he has into that piano, but it's very simple notes, and you can tell we never see him play in any other scene.
Yeah, you're right.
We don't see his direct talent, his direct jazz talent in any other scene, but you can tell he's far more talented and capable than what he's doing in that one moment. And you can tell that this is very easy for him. And then even when he gets to do the competition later on in the film, going into the climatic competition, you can tell it's just very much like, oh, this is very easy for him. And he has all this talent that he doesn't really tap into.
Yeah. He's definitely got an ear for jazz, so he's like a coach in a sense, where he understands where everything works, even to the point where he can tell if an instrument is out of tune ever so slightly.
How great was that scene? That if you need to establish a character like right off the bat, that is the way to do it.
Well, I like the way they established every character in the whole movie. I don't know, every interaction is a duel, and like the way the movie opens when Andrew is sitting in there playing drums and Terence just walks in on him, and then every sentence, every exchange of dialogue between them is like they're attacking each other in a way, or Terence is right on the attack and why did you stop? And Miles Teller is like, he's kind of he doesn't know
bewildered,
yeah, he doesn't know what to do, and then even Terence leaving in the middle of him playing is seen as an attack.
I noticed that there's a big, and I hadn't talked about this too much last night, but I noticed there's a big theme of selfishness. And I think from the very beginning you see Terence Fletcher's character, or Terence Fletcher being selfish. And that keeps mounting and mounting until, you see Andrew kind of gaining his own sort of selfishness, but understanding like you were talking about playing in front of an empty room basically, and like putting everything on the line for playing for 15 people. But I think the essence of it is that he's not playing for 15 people, he's playing for himself.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of the journey of his character is realizing that. And I think it might also help that Fletcher is so selfish, like when interacting with Andrew.
And going off of that, we definitely see over the course of the film, Andrew's character arc is him sort of becoming more like Fletcher. He becomes more Fletcher-esque. He takes on, he's very sheepish, he's very shy in the beginning. Nicole mentions at one point he just doesn't make eye contact, he just keeps his eyes on the floor. And then we see him, he starts swearing a lot, and he starts having angry outbursts, and he starts exhibiting all these qualities that are of Fletcher, and he similar to what you're saying about the selfishness, he adopts that as he starts to become more like Fletcher.
Yeah. I think also maybe, so I've definitely put a big emphasis on what happens between Act 2 and Act 3 for Andrew's character. I think his main development is he rises up to a point in Act 2 of being a lot like Fletcher and being very selfish. And I think it's how he comes out of that really shapes the movie into something great. I think it's Act 3, the way that he deals with how he acted in Act 2, that makes him a better person in the end. I mean, despite the fact that he doesn't end up with, like, the balance of life that he's looking for in the movie. Like, you know, there's this whole theme of he's going to die alone, but at least he'll die alone being great. But, like, he starts to realize, like, oh, maybe I have to balance a little bit more like that. You know, he calls Nicole again, but he never gets what he wants in that regard. But you see that he's, like, developing out of what he thought he had to be.
Yeah. So, Nick, I wanted to go back to this idea you had mentioned about duels and how a lot of the film is two characters, like, dueling each other.
Yeah, it when you ask someone about the movie, or the people I've asked, they always say, oh, it's very tense. Everything is there's a lot of tension in the movie. And I think that's because every interaction is pretty much a duel. There's this overarching theme of me versus you, or it's you versus yourself kind of thing. And, you know, towards the beginning, I kind of pictured Fletcher as like a monster, and he had this addiction to being a monster. But then you kind of realize, like, when you realize towards the end, at the scene in the bar, you realize his goal. You're like, oh, that's just what he thinks he's doing is right. You know, you can watch the movie, like I would say how my mom watches movies. She kind of doesn't really look too deep into it. She just sees, like, oh my God, like, it. You know, she thinks the movie's about, like, an abusive teacher.
Yeah.
Like, that's kind of what it's about. And obviously someone would say, like, oh man, like, obviously he got fired, like, duh, that he had what was coming to him. But it wasn't until this time I watched the movie where I actually sympathized with Fletcher.
Yeah.
Where I actually realized what he's trying to do. And he's obviously at the best music school in the country, in, like, the world, pretty much, and he's trying to make one of the best musicians in the world. And someone can just look into, you know, him being an abusive teacher and that kind of being, like, the whole thing, but you don't really think what he's trying to do, I guess.
And I think that's one of the best things that this film does, is that it gives dimension and humanity to Fletcher. And it's not just about the angry guy yelling at you. And I think a lesser filmmaker would have just made the film about, Andrew's trying to be a drummer, and he's got a terrible teacher who's just yelling at him all the time, and that's it.
Yeah.
But this movie takes all these steps to give dimension to Fletcher. And we have the scene where he finds out that his student died, which we found out later he lied about why he died, or how he died. But we have that scene where we see Fletcher so vulnerable. And we see a man who is throwing cymbals and chairs and getting, like, an outrage and making his students bleed all over the drum sets. He's crying in front of them. And it's not just that he is vulnerable, and it's not just that we as the audience see that he's vulnerable, but he is allowing his students to see that he's vulnerable. He made a conscious decision to let his students see him in that vulnerability. And then we have the whole scene inside the bar where he's talking about why he did what he did, and he spills out his whole ideology. He spills everything out, and it makes you, like you said, sympathize with him.
Yeah.
And you understand him as a character, and even from his own words, you may not agree with what he did, but he'll never apologize for it because he was trying to do one specific thing.
Exactly, and I think that scene at the bar is important because it sets Andrew's goals into reality, where he's kind of like, he's so concerned about becoming one of the greats. That's such a vague goal. You know, like when they're about to play Carnegie Hall, the jazz festival. Fletcher's saying to the people in his band, he's like, hey, you could be a first chair for Lincoln Hall or Symphony, whatever it was called. He's saying like all these things. They're like scouts there looking for people for real jobs, and it's like that's kind of like their goal. That's their goal, is to like be able to play jazz and pay the bills kind of thing. But Andrew's goal is kind of like this unrealistic, childish goal in a way, which brings back to like his character as being a kind of an immature child.
Yeah.
He's very self-isolating. He's very selfish. He's babied by his dad in little ways, and obviously the whole lack of a mother thing comes into account too. So, yeah, I guess those are just some thoughts I was throwing out. Yeah.
And I think the inclusion of the dad is so important because it gives you this immediate sense of where Andrew came from, how he was raised, and so you get an even stronger sense of who he is as a character. I love, near the beginning, one of the first times Andrew and his dad are going to the movies, and they're sitting in the row and they're about to start the movie and they're putting the Raisinets into the popcorn. Someone walks up behind the dad and hits it, like he gets hit in the back of the head with like a bag or something, and the dad apologizes. Even though it was the guy who hit him in the back of the head, it's the dad who apologizes, and I think that kind of shows who they are, that they're these overly apologetic people, and this is how they act and this is how they approach things. And so that's going to throw everything into chaos once Andrew, with that background, meets Fletcher. And clearly Andrew has never met anyone like Fletcher, and that throws everything into chaos.
I think you said this before, that a large part of the beginning of the movie is spent just watching Andrew try to please Fletcher and try to, like, all of his actions up until partway through Act 2 are him trying to be what Fletcher wants him to be, rather than, do it for himself.
Yeah.
And that's what I think the essence of the change from Act 2 to Act 3 is. I think when Andrew goes back out and picks his drums back up, he's doing it for himself. And I think you especially see that shift in the very last scene when he gets up and walks away, and then he realizes, wait, no, I don't need to, this isn't about Fletcher, this is about me. And that scene also is definitely, a nod to the Charlie Parker story that's thrown around a few times throughout the movie. But I also think that he comes back, and what he essentially does is take drumming and into his own hands, basically. And he says, like, I'm my own person. Like, Fletcher might have his own goals, and I might be really upset with him, but this is my career. This is what I want. So
let's dissect that final scene a little bit, because I think there's so much to unpack there, and I think it's one of the most rich moments of the movie. So just to set the scene a little bit, we have at this point Fletcher has been cast out of the school. They had already had the bar scene where Andrew and Fletcher catch up, and Fletcher says to Andrew, hey, I'm doing this band at Carnegie Hall, and I'd like you to come on and do the drumming. Andrew agrees, and then we realize Fletcher has set Andrew up. He has told him it was going to be the Whiplash song and the Caravan song, and it's not that, it's something completely different. And Fletcher has purposely set up Andrew and has screwed him over. And then Andrew leaves. He is completely ashamed and shocked of what happened. He leaves, and then he talks to his dad for a brief second, and then he goes back on, and he takes control of the situation. And I love this whole final part. And I think there's so much here I think we could have a whole hour-long discussion just of this one part of the movie, because there's so much richness in there. And especially just the exchanges of looks between Fletcher and Andrew. And just, you can see how the character's thought processes throughout the scene. You can see Fletcher going from shock of what's happening to anger to surprise to excitement, and you almost see for a brief second you almost see the passion in Fletcher reignited.
Yeah, like that last scene has so many emotions in it, which is one of my favorite scenes of that movie, because you realize Andrew takes control instead of Fletcher, and when he's like, I'll cue you, and then that leads, first it's like anger, and then it's like, okay, I can deal with this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think this is one of the biggest examples of the duel that you were talking about before, because it's very much a back and forth between Andrew and Fletcher for this whole entire sequence. And I think my favorite part of it is near the end, like you were talking about, where Fletcher and Andrew start working together, saying, "Oh, I'll cue you in," and Fletcher sees what he's doing, and he starts figuring out the situation, and then he takes off his jacket, and he's like starts cueing the other musicians, and they start working together because they have this moment of realization where they put aside their own differences, and they put aside the anger and the vengeance, and they realize we're making something really good here. And just out of this shared sheer passion for the music, they come together and they create something that's like probably the best work that both of them have ever done. And it's a very good note to leave the film off on. And there's so much to discuss as to what happens after the film ends, about what kind of person Andrew is after these events, what kind of person Fletcher is, how much this one event changed them. Are they actually changed, or was it just a brief, tiny encapsulated moment that's not going to stretch beyond what happened on that stage? But there's just so much to what happens to their characters in that moment.
Yeah, I feel like the open-ended scenes were so important for this movie's success, because a very closed scene, it wouldn't work with the movie the way that it played out. And that was like one of the smartest decisions.
It's also kind of jazzy to end it, like, in media res the way that it does, because it's like there's so much jazz that ends with like an unsatisfying chord, and I feel like, I don't know if that was an intent at all, but
I noticed, one of the things I noticed, that the part of the drum solo Andrew's doing at the end, like the slow build up, and then it turns into the roll. That's what plays in the beginning of the movie.
Oh,
yeah,
that's super cool.
Yeah, I thought of that. Yeah, but
I also, one of the things, I don't think anybody pointed it out yet. Right before that happens in the drumming scene at the very end, there's like a point where you see the fight between him and Fletcher kind of slow down to a point where you just focus on Andrew for a solid part of his solo, and I think that's kind of the way that the duel is ended, by Andrew basically shutting Fletcher out for a minute, and like, this is just me. This is for me right now.
Yeah, he's doing it for him. Yeah. Exactly.
Because there's a point at some point in the drum solo, you just don't see Fletcher for a really long time. You get close-ups of drums, you get close-ups of Andrew's face and his bleeding hands, but you never see Fletcher for a solid minute.
Exactly. Yeah, I think that also ties back into how Andrew was kind of at that point doing it for him. Yeah. He wasn't doing it for anyone else. And towards the beginning, all he wants to do is just be someone else. He wants to be like Buddy Rich. He wants to be like one of the greats. He, what were they doing? They weren't trying to do that. They were trying to just please themselves, do their own thing, And it comes back, like you mentioned last night, the whole movie, Andrew, instead of practicing his charts, he's practicing Buddy Rich. He's practicing, other things. But
he spends a lot of time listening to it, too.
Yeah, spends a lot of time listening, thinking, talking about it, whatever. Music is his whole life, obviously. When he takes Nicole on the first date, he's like, oh, I like it here because of the music. So But towards the end of the movie, he starts watching himself. He starts watching videos of himself play, and he starts,
There's a point where he just isn't listening. Like that Buddy Rich CD that he listens to all the time is like throughout the first half of the movie all the time, and it appears less and less. And there's a point where it just stops appearing.
Exactly.
He's just not listening to other people's work. He's focusing on his own.
So I think the question has to be asked: did Fletcher's methods work? Because would Andrew have been able to play the way that he played at the end? Where he was at the beginning of the film. Would he be able to play that same way at the end had it not been for Fletcher pushing him?
I very much think that yes, Fletcher won. I wrote it down somewhere here. Fletcher's work has come true, so Fletcher wins, but also Andrew wins because towards the beginning, Andrew was just so focused. I mean, he needed to change. He needed to have that realization that he wouldn't have had if Fletcher didn't push him to feel that, like, hey, I'm doing this for me. It just took a while to get there because obviously, he was the second chair, he was the page turner in like one of the, I don't know exactly the term, but it wasn't the studio band. It was it was just a band at the school run by this guy who didn't really care too much, like whatever. So when Fletcher comes in, and he recruits for the studio band is like I'm going to listen to what music, what's the school he goes to?
Schaefer?
Yeah, Schaefer, yeah. He's like, I'm going to listen to Schaefer, what they're doing. That's the band, the studio band. So he obviously, I don't think he was too motivated at the beginning. Obviously, in the beginning, still, he's very isolated. You see that scene of him walking home, and there's like a party going on. And he's like, he just goes into his apartment where he lives by himself. He lives, even towards the end of the movie when he moves out of, he gets kicked out of school, he's living by himself, so.
And no roommate. He does not have a roommate, which I found to be interesting. Because I don't know what year, or maybe they said, but I don't know what year he's supposed to be. But I found that was interesting. He just had no roommate whatsoever. Like, oh, okay.
It just adds to his character of him being this lonely, self-centered, friendless child who has an unrealistic and ambiguous type goal.
Yeah.
He's not very likable at all. He's actually, you're rooting for him, obviously, because there's this other presumably horrible force that you want to root against. Yeah. But Andrew, I think, is very much not likable. Yeah. He is very, very self-centered.
I think that's what the phone call to Nicole is supposed to illustrate. I think it's supposed to be a hopeful note, just like that dinner scene that happened earlier in the film where he's talking to people in his family about like success, and he says that line about I'd rather die alone at 34, being one of the greatest jazz musicians to ever live, than live to my 90s and no one remembers me. I think like he just builds up more and more of that selfishness and single-mindedness, and it's that phone call to Nicole that kind of illustrates he's had a change of character. He's realized that there's some sort of balance to be struck. Yeah. Even if he never like fully gets to that or even tries that hard.
Exactly.
I think it's just supposed to be like he understands now.
We all knew that wasn't going to work because he completely tore her down. It was like, we are not going to work because I am focused on myself and music more than you. Yeah. So it's like, oh my god.
Yeah, you can in that scene you can see that like void of emotion and like see the whole like selfishness in his eyes.
Yeah.
As he talks to Nicole, and for that like kind of same reason, it's like one of probably like my second favorite like scenes in that movie.
Yeah, it's so matter of fact. Like he's like, here we go. This is exactly what's going to happen. Bing, bang, bang, boom, and that's it. And you said void of emotion, and I think that's such a great scene because of how it's done.
Exactly.
It would not have had the same effect if it was some sort of like emotional, like he's like, I really want this to work, but it's not going to work, and I want to stay friends, and I want to do this, and I want to do that. He's just like, nope, this is what's going to happen. This is why we got to break up, and then she leaves, and he's like, all right, that's done. Now I can move on to the next part of my day.
Yeah. And I think it's kind of out of the blue too. I think There might even be a cut where you just hear the first thing of that scene that you hear before you see anything, any indication that he's going to be with Nicole. You just hear him say, "This is why we need to break up," or something like that, before anything else. Just out of the blue, he's decided we need to break up. And you just instantly, before you see anything about them having dinner together, you know.
So, and I kind of forget exactly where that scene takes place in the context of the film. Isn't that right before he tackles J.K. Simmons?
Yeah,
it's right before.
It's before, but if I remember correctly,
it's like right before.
Yeah, it's pretty close.
Oh, because he gets that text from her on the bus when they're on the way to the first competition.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And he says, you know, sends him a text that says, like, text me when you get back, maybe we can hang out.
Yeah, she said, like, I'll come over.
And you, like, see the look on his face that's like, I don't know if that's going to work.
Yeah.
And then the performance, and then he comes back.
See, like, the reason I wonder the context is because it seems like in that moment he's very much... the impression I get is that Andrew thinks he's pretty much almost there at being a great. Like, he is so far along, he's like, I gotta just keep doing what I'm doing, and I'm gonna be there. And then it all comes crashing down when Fletcher kicks him out because he got into the car accident, and then he tackles Fletcher, and it all comes crashing down at that point.
That was an intense scene. He's literally playing with broken fingers.
Yeah.
It was.
And probably a concussion.
He's got whiplash
Definitely.
from the car crash, and he's got like a... That was... I never really thought about it too hard when I initially watched it, but watching it this time around, I was like, oh man, that's a lot of damage.
And what's interesting, a little bit behind the scenes stuff is, well, beforehand, Miles Teller was in a car accident when he was younger, but also because you can see he has some scars on his face, and that's from this car accident he was in when he was young. But also, the writer and director Damien Chazelle, while filming this movie, got into a big car accident.
Wow.
So I don't know if that fueled him to add the car accident to the movie, or if the car accident was already written to the script and then it just kind of happened to him. But I think that's kind of interesting, those two connections.
That's weird. Yeah, I think that whole thing is just like the whole day is another duel. It's like...
I think it's a duel with himself, honestly.
It is. It is. There are a lot of details in this whole thing. I like the whole kind of scenes leading up to the car crash deal a lot with another overarching theme of time and being on time. Like during one of the second duel in the movie when Fletcher's like, this room 6 o'clock. He like wakes up at like 6:03. So then he has this, it's just like one of those things like, oh, I can be a little late, whatever. So, by the time he gets there, I don't really know what time it was when he got there, like 20 past maybe, or
Something
I don't
like
know.
that.
Fletcher's not there and he makes him wait. Obviously, I think Fletcher actually was there at 6 a.m. And saw that he wasn't there, so Fletcher left and made him wait. So Fletcher like won the first duel, but again, like the whole thing where it's like, be there at 5 and he shows up past 5 and he's like, oh, I forgot my sticks, I'll go get them, blah blah blah. And then when he gets in the car crash, it's like, you better be here at 5:30. 5:30 is when we're like going on stage. And he gets in the car crash, you see the car upside down, it says 5:32. I thought that kind of played in with like the 6:03 thing where he's just, like Fletcher walks in to the first rehearsal 9 o'clock. Like 0 seconds.
Literally right on the dot.
Yeah, on the dot. And like the whole thing about Andrew playing, like were you rushing or were you dragging before that? He's like, not quite my time. You're on Fletcher's time, dude. Like, he is a human metronome.
Yeah.
It also makes me wonder if there was any attention paid to that in the last scene when he basically effectively shows up for the performance a whole song late, Like he's almost not there for the first song, and then when he comes back, I don't know if there's any indication of any sort of time in that scene, but I wonder if like he's kind of on his own time then. He doesn't even start when Fletcher wants him to start.
Yeah.
He starts way before. And that might be kind of a nod to that. Now, not only is he starting on time, he's starting, early, but also late because he's showed up late.
Right.
Yeah.
talked about the theme of duels, the whole underarching theme of jazz is dying, so it doesn't necessarily have to deal with like certain parts of the movie, but just like it's like you can kind of look at it from a 1D standpoint. It's like, who cares? It's jazz, you know? I mean, I like jazz.
Yeah.
I personally like jazz, but like, yeah, you interview 1 million people.
Yeah.
How many of them are going to say jazz is their favorite? You know, like,
So
you're not
should-
appealing to the masses. You're appealing to,
Yeah.
you know, so, you know, it's just one of those things, but...
I think also that's part of Fletcher's selfishness, because he has realized that jazz is for himself. Like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
he doesn't care that there are 15 people in the audience. And I think it's when Andrew gets up to speed with that he becomes, you know, a great...
Yeah. You know what? I just saw this line that I guess is really important, maybe the most important in the movie, when in the bar scene, when Fletcher is talking to Andrew, it said the next Charlie Parker, which is who Andrew wants to be,
Mhm.
said would never be discouraged.
Yes.
So I guess that's the whole thing, is they have that in common. They both idolize Charlie Parker, I guess. But
I think Charlie Parker's more of a metaphor for, you know, a great jazz musician.
yeah, well, yeah, he could be like the whole great metaphor in the movie, but also as characters, I think that's what they see in their eyes as a great. And Fletcher being this character who wants to create a great, and Andrew who wants to be a great.
Yeah.
So,
I think Fletcher definitely has internalized that story of Charlie Parker getting a cymbal thrown at his head. Like,
Yeah.
I feel like that has shaped his career to
That's
such a
become his
strong-
mantra.
Yeah.
Yeah.
mm-hmm.
And yeah, one of the first things that you see is him throwing things at Andrew. Like,
Yeah, so he obviously like took a lot of different elements from that story and I guess in a way tested them in reality to see if anyone could withstand them. You know, like I think Fletcher gave Andrew everything Fletcher had. I think he gave him everything, and no matter what, Andrew got back up every time.
And
Even from like the physical abuse, the test, like that whole thing about with Connolly and the other drummer, making the three of them battle it out. That wasn't like he knew he was going to pick Andrew the whole time. He just wanted to like see if Andrew would call it quits.
And that plays into the very end when ultimately Andrew is not discouraged. He is discouraged for a moment. He walks off stage and then he turns around and goes right back on. And he plays, as Charlie Parker did, plays the best solo they've ever heard.
I'm still not sure if Fletcher, if that was his goal all along in that end scene, or if there was a malicious element to it. Because I feel like...
The whole intent of the Carnegie Hall?
Yeah, of setting him up with the wrong piece of music.
I think that was like the final test.
I'm not sure that he was intending to test him at the very beginning of it. I think he might have realized that Andrew took it as a test, you know, partway through him drumming. But I feel like when Andrew comes back out, Fletcher is not expecting that, and he's angry.
Oh yeah. Okay.
I agree. I don't think it was a test at all. I think it was purely fueled by vengeance. He just wanted to ruin Andrew's chances of ever having a career. He just wanted to humiliate him. It was done purely out of vengeance, because I think if he had walked out and had been thinking in my head, okay, I'm going to test Andrew, I want to see if he can actually do it because I think he can, I don't think he would have been as surprised.
Yeah.
We definitely see a lot of Fletcher being like, wait, what are you doing? What are you doing? Like, what's going on? And completely shocked as to what's going on. And I don't think he would have had that level of surprise had he been planning it all along.
And at some point in that scene, there's also like, well, first of all, he comes over and like insults him or says something. You can't tell what he's saying.
So I thought he said like, "I know it was you."
He did say that.
Yeah, you see that, like, that I know it was you moment.
Yeah.
Which was, like, kind of like the final test that played into it, because Fletcher knew it was Andrew who spoke out and got him fired. And he was like, this is how I get back at you, but are you going to get back at me?
There's also, when Andrew comes back, though, he says, he, like, comes over and says something. And
He's like, "What are you doing?"
Yeah,
but
what are you doing?
he says something that we can't hear at some point. Like he says like, I'm gonna rip your throat out or something.
Yeah,
Like,
it's funny. That's exactly what I was thinking. He said.
Maybe that is. Maybe we did hear it. I don't know, but yeah, like he says one of those like, you know, very malicious lines like right after he starts playing, even though he's doing it perfectly. Like, so I don't think it was a test like in the beginning. I think it is just Fletcher's raw emotion, you know, fueling him. Which was another thing that I talked about last night, is I think Fletcher's a very emotional-driven character. Despite the fact that he seems like a machine, like a drill sergeant a lot of the time. I think a lot of it's for selfish reasons, and he's driven by how he feels at any given moment.
And I think, going off of that, I think another thing pointing to why it wasn't a test was the bar scene when he's talking with Andrew. It seems very definitive that Fletcher is thinking he's past all this. He I think at one point even says he tried and he failed to find. He was not able to find the next Charlie Parker. He did everything he could to find one, but it never happened. And then he said something along the lines of, well, at least I tried, and most people don't even get to say that they could do that. So I think he's very much thinking he had failed at what he was trying to do. So I don't think he was necessarily testing... explicitly or intentionally testing Andrew by the end.
Yeah.
But I think then Andrew turned it around himself.
Yeah.
Well, maybe, I don't know, why would he have invited him to play in Carnegie Hall? Maybe.
I think it was to get back at him.
It was just, I think it was purely just out of vengeance to humiliate him.
Did he think that Andrew was defeated at that point, though? Because he was like working, he may have said to Fletcher, like, hey, I'm just like working at a sub shop kind of thing, living by myself, you know, like... Maybe he was alluding to, like, I don't know, maybe I'm just thinking too hard, or I'm seeing something that's not there.
Well, I don't think...
maybe... So in the bar scene, he does say something like that. He's talking about, like, how he's doing now, and, you know, I don't think he talks about, like, being in a band or anything, and I think maybe Fletcher is saying, like, maybe that's the reason, part of the reason he's getting back at him is he's seen him give up on drumming. And so he's like, oh, you're not the guy, I'm gonna ruin you now.
But why would he set him up? Because the whole point of the Carnegie Hall was that if you play there and if you mess up, you'll never have it. He says you'll have to find another career. So if Fletcher's point was to try to get back at Andrew for like quitting music, and if he was saying like, you know, I can't believe you quit drumming, you shouldn't have quit that, so I'm going to do this and embarrass you so that you feel the passion again. I don't know why he would put him on such a public stage where for messing up he could have lost his, like, ended the career.
I think he was trying to end his career. I think he saw, okay, you've given up, that means that you're not the guy. I'm going to, like, end you. You're not going to play jazz anymore.
But I think
because you gave up, and that means you're not the next Charlie Parker kind of a thing.
But I feel like if Fletcher saw that, and he saw that Andrew had given up, and he was trying to chastise him for giving up, specifically for giving him up, I don't know if Fletcher... I feel like that would be beating a dead horse. Like, Fletcher would be like, all right, well, I think Fletcher was purely just trying to humiliate him and end him. I do completely agree that I think he was trying to end his career. But I don't think it was driven by this idea that Fletcher was upset with Andrew for giving it up. And I don't think at that point in time, I think it's very clear that Fletcher had seen the promise in Andrew, and he was constantly trying to push him because he knew that Andrew could be great. I think that becomes very clear at the one point when Andrew's listing off all the other guys, like, oh, why don't you get these people to do Carnegie Hall? And Fletcher at one point says about one of them, like, oh, he was only incentive for you. I think it's very clear that Fletcher always saw Andrew as having the potential to be one of the greats. Yes. And he was just trying, and while Fletcher, I don't think would ever explicitly admit it to Andrew, Fletcher was specifically trying to push Andrew to becoming one of the greats. And I think in that Carnegie Hall thing, at that point, I don't think Fletcher's pushing him anymore. I don't think he's trying to get Andrew to become a great anymore, because from the bar scene, I think it's clear that Fletcher thinks he's done and he's lost.
Mm-hmm.
And Fletcher even talks about the Carnegie Hall band, and he's like, because he says he's doing it, and Andrew goes, "Oh, that's great," and he's like, "Yeah, okay, it's whatever." Like he has no stakes in it. He doesn't care about it at all. And so for him, it doesn't matter if he completely ruins Andrew's career. It doesn't matter if he even ruins his own career. I think he's done at that point. He does not care anymore. And then Andrew takes it back at the end.
I think also that's very evident in the speech that he gives to the band before they go out. Like he says, all of your careers are on the line. You could end up with great jobs, or you could end up never being hired again. And then he says, but let's just have fun.
Yeah.
Which is something he's like talked down on the whole time.
Exactly.
Like, obviously he doesn't care about this performance.
Yeah.
You can see that from that speech.
I think there are 2 points where Fletcher says just have fun. One was that ending part, and one was the break that they have during that first rehearsal where he's talking to Andrew in the hallway, and he's like, "Oh yeah, so what does your mom do? What's your dad do? Well, and just keep in mind, just go in there and have fun." And then it starts.
Yeah.
And so I think it's deliberate when Fletcher says just have fun. There's an irony to it.
Yeah.
There's a sarcasm to it.
Yeah, because he's talked down that, like, the whole movie, like, he's against just have fun.
Yeah.
And then he says it at the end, it's just I'm done kind of thing.
Yeah. He doesn't have any stakes, any emotional stakes in it anymore. He's completely through with it.
Yeah, it's like this whole thing, like it's mentioned like he's opening the jazz festival. Like I'm assuming it's like a 3-day thing, so he's probably on like the Friday night opener kind of thing, and he's just like they're running jazz standards like Whiplash and Caravan and stuff. So it's obviously stuff the whole audience has heard before. They're not going for anything serious, It's just he obviously doesn't care.
And I think maybe I'm wrong, but it seemed like to me that he wasn't actively coaching the players at that point. I think he was just showing up and just conducting. And very and
talked down on that before.
Exactly. It goes back to that point where he's like anyone can just conduct. What I'm doing is this, and it shows he's completely lost all that. I would say passion. His passion for maybe not for jazz, but for teaching or or at least his passion in this regard.
Yeah, because you see
he's sold out.
Yeah, you see all that passion in like the first and second half, like the first and second parts of the movie, and then that final scene, he just doesn't care at all, and he's just like, just do whatever.
And this is really, I think, every time I watch this, I always just constantly think about passion and how passion drives people, and how if you are truly passionate about something, like they say, you will not be discouraged. And I think we're all film people here. We're all film majors. And yes, you're not a film major.
It's all right.
Well, you're film oriented. You like film and stuff.
I have a degree in media studies, so if that counts.
So I know when I watch Whiplash, I always think about my own drive and passion for film, and it makes me think about, and I do see a lot of I relate to the story a lot of like coming from a place and then meeting a force, and the force being industry, the force being other people, the force. I think Fletcher is kind of like a personification of a lot of different things that people, very passionate people, end up hitting this wall, being life or an industry, or you move out to Hollywood and you're so full of passion and you're like, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, and then your first roadblock you hit, and it's all about how you can move past that and how you can overcome and how you won't be discouraged when you hit those roadblocks and you have people tell you no, and you have people tell you that you're not good enough, and you have people tell you that you're not talented and you have no business being there. And I think Fletcher is definitely a personification of that.
He tries
in many ways.
Tries to make himself put the roadblocks in front of people who he wants to succeed.
And because people will, and similar to that whole beginning part when they're trying to find the person who's out of tune, and the guy clearly just breaks and leaves, and then Fletcher says, well, he wasn't the one out of tune, you were. And then he was saying, essentially, because that person just broke, that he didn't deserve to be there.
Exactly. It's like he didn't know he was out of tune, and that's if he was in or out of tune, and that's worse.
Yeah. And he broke in that moment. He relented. And it's I think Fletcher was looking for the person who was not going to relent, the person who wasn't going to break, and the person who wasn't going to be discouraged. So that concludes our discussion of Whiplash. Next week, we will be talking about another Damien Chazelle film, La La Land.
Wait, that's Damien Chazelle too?
Yep.
I didn't know that.
He did La La Land.
Him and his jazz, show tunes, movies. Oh man, this guy's a real music snob.
And then his next film is Jazz on the Moon with First Man. No, there's no jazz. There's no jazz in First Man. He's doing a story about the moon landing and Neil Armstrong, which looks phenomenal.
Cool, I'll have to check it out.
Yeah, it looks incredible with Ryan Gosling returning from La La Land.
Dude, I love Ryan Gosling. He's so good.
And the movie looks awesome. So next week we'll be talking about La La Land, and that will be a good discussion. So I want to thank the panel for being here. Connor Murphy.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for showing me this great movie.
Oh, you're very welcome. I'm glad. I was really looking forward to hearing what you would say about it, because I knew you hadn't seen it before, and I really was interested to hear what you're going to say. Crystal Gonzalez, thank you.
Thank you for having me. I'll be here more than once.
Definitely. And Nick Polidor.
Thank.
All right, so yes, this has been Movie Night Tonight, our Whiplash discussion. Next week is La La Land. Thanks everyone for listening. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more content. And be sure to follow us on our various social medias at Movie Paradise 99. So thanks everyone.